Good morning, I'm Heidi Erbsen, and welcome to this week's broadcast of the Global Current. First up in news, staffer Dina Al-Sayed updates us on the recent earthquake in Iran.
A massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake along the Pakistan-Iran border last Tuesday has resulted in deaths and widespread destruction in both countries. The earthquake occurred near the city of Khash in the southeast portion of Iran. Its subsequent tremors sent shockwaves that were also felt across the Middle East from New Delhi to Dubai. The quake hit Iran at 3:44 p.m. local time. The U.S. Geological Survey measured the initial shockwave at 7.8 on the Richter scale, followed by an aftershock some 3 hours later, which registered at 4.4. The earthquake hit 82 kilometers below the Earth's surface in the Iranian province of Sistan, Baluchistan, near the city of Khash, with a population of nearly 180,000, and the city of Saravan, which has 250,000. The epicenter was also about 198 kilometers southeast of the city of Zahedan and 250 kilometers northwest of the Turbat in Pakistan. The damage was widespread throughout the two countries. The quake leveled entire communities, collapsing buildings and destroying homes. Current reports place the death toll at 46 Iranians and 7 Pakistanis, but hundreds more are feared dead. Officials expect the casualty figures to rise as rescue crews search for people trapped in the ruins of collapsed buildings. Iran's Islamic Republic News Agency is reporting that Iran has declared a state of emergency in the region. At least 20 search and rescue teams and 3 helicopters from the Iranian Red Crescent have been deployed at the area. Meanwhile, the Pakistani military moved forces and equipment into its border territories where houses and shops have collapsed. Tuesday's powerful quake was the second significant earthquake to hit Iran in less than a week. On April 9, a powerful 6.3 magnitude quake struck close to the Bushehr nuclear power station, killing 37 people and injuring 850 more. The quake was powerful enough that its effects were felt across the entire region. Almost 1,500 kilometers across the Persian Gulf, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, residential home and office buildings were evacuated as thousands of people gathered outside Dubai's famous skyscrapers, which shook as the tremors hit. In addition, New Delhi reported feeling 2 shock waves, the second of which was a strong wave that lasted almost 10 seconds. The shock waves were also reported in Saudi Arabian capital of Riyadh and its neighboring country Amman. Iran is no stranger to geologic activity. In 2003, Iran suffered a massive 6.6 quake, which destroyed huge parts of southeastern city of Bam, killing almost 26,000 people. Although the April 16 earthquake should be responsible for far fewer deaths, initial reports suggest it's the most powerful earthquake to hit Iran in almost 50 years. This was Dina El-Sayed for the Global Current.
Up next in news, staffer Liv Colson informs us about the violence spurred by provincial elections in Iraq.
As the provincial elections in Iraq approach, a string of car bombings and assassinations continue to claim the lives of campaigning politicians and civilians. The attacks have instilled fear throughout the country and have concerned international observers who hope for the success of Iraq's first election since the withdrawal of American troops. Last Monday was the deadliest day by far, when 25 separate car bombings were staged across Iraq, killing at least 61 people and injuring close to 300. The violence continued throughout the week. Car bombings on Tuesday claimed at least 4 lives, and on Wednesday, blasts around Baghdad killed at least 3 and injured 16. No one has claimed responsibility for the attacks, but given a high number of political figures among the dead, the violence seems clearly correlated to the upcoming elections. More than a dozen candidates have been assassinated, and death threats are a quotidian reality for those who continue to campaign. Yet the candidates themselves are not the only targets. 20 people were killed last week when powerful explosives were detonated during a political rally, and on Monday, 2 schools that were meant to serve as polling sites were destroyed by homemade bombs. In response to the escalating violence, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki called for security forces to cast their votes a week in advance to prevent security shortcomings on Election Day. The early vote was carried out peacefully, allowing nearly 700,000 members of the Iraqi police force and army to provide security for this weekend, when the rest of Iraqis will cast their votes. Except that is, in the Sunni provinces of Anbar and Nieve, where the elections have been postponed. Maliki cited security reasons for the delay in these provinces, as anti-Maliki protests in the region have continued for nearly 5 months. Maliki's Sunni critics view the prime minister as an autocrat who has discarded any notions of power sharing and threatens to form a majority Shiite government. However, this decision to forestall elections was widely criticized, even by American Secretary of State John Kerry, and its validity has been called into question. The protests, which have attracted more than 1 million people, have remained peaceful. Many speculate that by delaying elections in these provinces, Maliki is instead acting to deter the election of Sunni officials hostile to the Shia-dominated government. The perpetrators of Iraq's recent political attacks, however, don't seem to have the same black and white divide between Sunni and Shiite as the Prime Minister Maliki. The assassinations have killed politicians from both sects. Despite no organizational claim, the attacks bear resemblance to past al-Qaeda attacks. Al-Qaeda in Iraq primarily targets Shias, but also attacks Sunnis who accept the Shia-led government or who simply participate in politics. With the influx of Sunni fighters from across the poorly monitored border in Syria, al-Qaeda in Iraq has experienced rapid growth. Since the withdrawal of American troops in December 2011, al-Qaeda has managed to coordinate one large attack per month. Whether al-Qaeda operatives have a definitive aim in mind or not, it is evident that the recent violence will impact the course and results of the election this Saturday. Killing candidates means instilling fear, said Hamid Fadhil, a political science professor at Baghdad University. And that is why I think it will affect voter participation, because I don't think that people will want to risk their lives again. Liv Coulson, The Global Current.
Moving on to analysis, staffer Bjorn Schwarzenbach reports on the contested election of Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela following the death of former President Hugo Chavez.
Elections disputed as tensions rise in Venezuela. After a short month of intense campaigning in Venezuela, the Electoral Committee designated Nicolas Maduro as president-elect on Monday, invoking fierce protesting by supporters of opposition candidate Henrique Capriles Radonsky. Capriles and his supporters have called for a recount of the extremely close election results, in which 50.7% went to Maduro, while Capriles garnered 49.1% of the votes. These elections were called together on March 5th after the then-president Hugo Chavez died of cancer and a respiratory infection. The Constitution calls for emergency elections to be held no more than 30 days after any death of the president, and that the vice president, then Nicolas Maduro, would be the interim president until a new leader is elected. After a key element in the presidential campaign, Maduro and Chavez have had a long and devoted history, and as such, this relationship will continue to shape the politics of Venezuela. Their relationship began in 1992 when Maduro's wife was on the defense team for Hugo Chavez after his failed coup. Nicolas Maduro was seen by many to be instrumental to the left-wing Fifth Republic movement and the first election of Hugo Chavez in 1998. Later, this support would lead to further political positions for Maduro, from being elected to the Venezuelan Chamber of Deputies, to the National Constituent Assembly, and finally to the National Assembly in 2000. Maduro eventually found himself appointed to be Minister of Foreign Affairs in 2006. The Chavez regime had clearly defined Venezuelan foreign policy through its strained relations with the U.S. and opportunistic diplomacy with developing countries, particularly states with cooler relations with the United States or West. Several heated relations involved the recalling of ambassadors and diplomatic personnel back to Caracas. This has happened with Israel, Mexico, the United States, and Peru. Diplomatic customs have also fallen victim to the Chavez regime of poor relationship building in which U.S. diplomatic packages were improperly handled by Venezuela. In addition to counterproductive diplomatic practices, Chavez has publicly lambasted states and leaders to the point of absurdity, where in the 2006 United Nations General Assembly, he called the United States President George W. Bush the devil. The strong relations that Chavez has sought to develop generally have centered on energy and military policy, along with shifting the balance of power against the USA, particularly in arms trades and oil deals with Iran and Russia. Throughout the mudslinging campaign period this past month, Maduro's lack of personality and charisma could be seen by many analysts. This has been in clear contrast with Hugo Chavez, whose revolution was well known for his personality and charisma. The state practice of nepotism, as developed by Chavez and his presidency, seems likely to continue due to him having selected Nicolas Maduro as his party's successor and all his previous high-level political posts. In addition, Maduro's wife took over from him as Speaker of the House and now is the Attorney General for Venezuela, along with Maduro being the president. This nepotism and corruption has led to high levels of mismanagement in state-owned enterprises, along with the emergence of a revolutionary bourgeoisie. Financial strains, along with allegations of electoral fraud, are quickly adding to the violent opposition protests this week, in which 7 people have already died as a result, according to the CNN. Already, Maduro hasn't stepped far from Chavez and his rash language by which he accuses the United States of financing and directing all the acts of violence in this country. Many of the demonstrators seem to be students, and along with Capriles, they have been calling for electoral recount of the extremely thin margin votes. With food shortages, high unemployment, huge public debts, rising poverty, and rising inflation, President Nicolas Maduro cannot afford to both provide economic solutions and keep his intensely dedicated yet poorer supporters happy. Positive economic solutions that attack inflation and public corruption cannot follow through without negatively affecting the lower classes that depend on Chavezism's social services. And that's the 50.7% of Venezuela that supported Maduro. This is Bjorn Schwarzenbach for the Global Current.
And now, news editor Zach Kotz reports on the manhunt for 3 farm foremen who reportedly wounded 30 migrant workers in the south of Greece.
Police in the small Peloponnesian village of Neo-Manolata in South Greece are currently on the lookout for 3 farm foremen suspected of shooting and wounding nearly 30 migrant workers. The men in question, who range in age from 21 to 39, are reportedly foremen at a strawberry farm near the small town, which is about 160 miles west of Athens. The farm's nearly 200 migrant workers, most of whom are Bangladeshi, had confronted the foreman demanding payment for their work when one of the supervisors opened fire on the crowd before fleeing the scene. Police Captain Haralambos Svetsos told the AP news agency that the workers had moved threateningly towards the foreman when the shots were fired. None of the 30 workers wounded suffered life-threatening injuries. Though the 3 suspects remain at large, the police have made 2 arrests. The New York Times reports that a 38-year-old man accused of giving refuge to 2 of the foremen in his home overnight was arrested on a charge of harboring suspected criminals. Police also reported that the owner of the strawberry farm, an unidentified 57-year-old man, was also arrested. Though the owner was not present at the time of the shooting, he was being held on a charge of, quote, being a moral accomplice to attempted manslaughter. The farm owner had arranged to pay overdue wages to 80 workers, but backtracked when 200 claimants appeared at the meeting place. One of the immigrants told Greek TV that they had been promised wages of 22 euros per day. The worker, who chose to remain anonymous, recounted the conditions that led to the confrontation. Quote, "They kept telling us that we will get paid in a month, and this has been going on for more than a year. We don't talk about it because we are afraid. We are afraid that we will be killed or kicked out." Ethnic tensions and violence against immigrants is nothing new in Neo-Manolata, which is home to a high number of migrant workers, and has previously been in the spotlight over alleged exploitation of migrants. According to the BBC, in 2008, migrant workers staged strikes protesting inhumane working conditions. A social media campaign has now been launched to boycott the fruit from Neo-Manolata, referring to the product as blood strawberries. Last summer, a 30-year-old Egyptian man sustained multiple injuries when 2 Greek men allegedly jammed his head in a car window before dragging him along a country road. The 39-year-old foreman being sought in this case is currently awaiting trial as one of the Greek men charged in last summer's attack. The Council of Europe, Europe's foremost human rights watchdog, issued a report earlier last week which detailed the abuse against migrants in Greece. The report warned that democracy is at risk from a growing wave of racist violence. Particularly, the report cited the role of Greece's Golden Dawn Party, a neo-Nazi group that has been on the rise in recent years. Greek officials have been quick to condemn the attack. According to the Financial Times, Public Order Minister Nikos Dendias said in his condemnation of the shootings, quote, "This unprecedented and devastating attack is alien to Greek morality, and the authorities will react swiftly. Respect for the law is a fundamental obligation for all of us, and a necessary condition for the country's economic recovery." This has been Zach Kotz for the Global Current.
And finally, producer Laura Toledo interviews Dr. Gerald Kirsch, professor of medicine and international health at Harvard University, about the changing face of the World Health Organization.
My name is Gerald Kirsch. I'm a professor of medicine and international health at both the medical school and the School of Public Health. And my current activity is centered at a new emerging infectious diseases laboratory where I am one of the associate directors.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the program, Dr. Kirsch. We appreciate you taking the time. If we could go ahead and get started. Can we just examine the background of the World Health Organization? It seems it was originally created to eradicate disease, most notably smallpox. How have those priorities changed in the 21st century? Is it still disease-focused, or has it turned into more of a public health, best practices type of thing, or humanitarian aid and medical assistance, or some other focus?
It's all of the above, and actually this started with the League of Nations, and then as a global organization oriented towards improving health, disease eradication, where it was feasible, was always a goal. But the first real example of that was the smallpox eradication program, where it was actually feasible. There were some attempts after WHO was created, when the United Nations was developed after the Second World War, so it became a successor to the League of Nations, which obviously had ceased to operate during the war. The organization took upon itself the goal of trying to eradicate malaria with very limited tools, the main one at the time being the availability of the drug chloroquine, which had come out of the research to deal with malaria among the troops in the Second World War. But it proved to be impossible to eradicate malaria with simply a treatment, however effective and safe and non-toxic it was. So the next and fully successful campaign was the one against smallpox. But the organization really branched out because opportunities for disease eradication are rather limited and really depend on having reasonable tools that could be used. The organization of the healthcare systems and the delivery of healthcare in countries was a critical issue that needed attention. The central issue is that WHO has appropriately broadened its mandate as understanding of the concerns and needs have grown, but it hasn't been able to grow concomitantly, organizationally, in order to address those broader mandates.
You mentioned they are a part of the UN system, and there are certainly political negotiation difficulties there. It seems, though, that member states, everyone would be in support of good health practices and better health around the world. So can you give me an example of some places the WHO has become politically handicapped because of negotiations within member states?
Well, I'll give you one very good example. It ultimately ended up successful, but as the understanding of the importance of tobacco as a health risk for a multiplicity of illnesses, and it was called a Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And they organized a small staff to try to shepherd this as a treaty among nations, which would be agreed upon just like nuclear nonproliferation, with the campaigns to reduce smoking in the developed world. Many of the tobacco companies were looking to sell more of their product in developing countries, so populations were at risk. Well, I happened to be at one of the annual meetings of the WHO, the governance, where all of the countries come together. The health minister of Zimbabwe got up and said, "We are a poor country. A big part of our foreign currency earnings come from selling high-quality tobacco. We don't have a problem with tobacco-related diseases because our population is too poor to buy cigarettes and smoke a lot. So we don't support the Framework Convention. And nothing happened at that session of the General Assembly of the WHO. And that's the kind of glitch that a political system can throw into what is otherwise a very clear, obvious, and good thing to do.
Absolutely. Now, since it is a member organ of the United Nations and kind of the premier international health organization, the WHO has enjoyed somewhat of a kind of commander-in-chief role on issues of global health. Now that the scene is a little more crowded with NGOs and civil society and other international organizations kind of getting into the mix, how can the WHO coordinate with and incorporate these other agencies into their efforts?
It has, to me, a critical role to play. First of all, it's the only organization that has entree to all of the member states. Our own Department of Health and Human Services, our foreign assistance, our research capacity connects with some countries, but not all. So WHO has a critical role to play in connecting across the board with countries, and therefore is in a position to work to advocate for sensible policies within those countries. What it doesn't have is the resources, usually, to make a lot of things happen. Highly qualified individuals who can sift through the myriad of information to try to formulate appropriate policies and implementation and monitoring and evaluation that is absolutely necessary if we're going to make progress. You mentioned NGOs and civil society, and there are a whole host of such organizations. In those settings where there are large numbers of NGOs, small and large, they frequently fail to communicate with one another. There's duplication. There's working at cross purposes. There's competition. There's backbiting, and the sum and substance is less than the sum of the parts and the resources that are available. And it would be so wonderful to be able to have a strong and effective organization like WHO that could play that kind of coordinating role.
Okay, so you've been at some of their meetings, and I assume you've met many people associated with the WHO. In your view, is this role something that they would be open to taking, or do they still kind of want to be at the forefront, doing their own programs, setting the agenda, instead of kind of taking a step back and driving it?
I think they're still trying to be all things in every sphere, more than they can sustain. And I would prefer a more of a soul searching and a clarity of mission to come out of that, and then with agreement and support from the member states to move ahead and operate in that defined sphere.
Certainly. And how has the WHO gotten involved in mental health? Because that's something big in the United States now with the gun control debate and providing services for people with mental setbacks, disabilities. Have they been very active in that kind of region of health?
Yeah, I think it's part of the realization that non-communicable and chronic diseases are an increasing part of the spectrum of burden of ill health. So WHO has really been trying to highlight the need to develop cost-effective ways for improvements in capacity, and it's not just about a pharmacological approach, medication. Let's get lots of barefoot doctors out there throwing antidepressants around or antipsychotics around. You really need to develop a whole structure, and that comes back to what we talked about at the outset, was the limitations of the organization to be able to deal with that.
The WHO has been focused for all these years on kind of existing diseases and existing health problems. How much work do they do into new diseases? And you yourself, as a professor in the infectious diseases school, how can they kind of get in front of things? Is that part of their research sort of division, or what are they doing in those areas?
One of the strengths of WHO is that they have access to countries. So that provides WHO with some opportunities to promote and support surveillance as new and emerging infections arise. WHO has coordinated a set of surveillance sentinel sites around the world, and they have several of these for influenza, for example. These new agents, these slightly altered influenza viruses generally arise in Asia for a variety of reasons, and the surveillance centers can identify what's circulating, and on the basis of what's circulating, the seasonal influenza vaccine is selected and made. But whatever is happening out there, we're going to survey it and then act on information as it becomes available. Try to get ahead of the curve rather than always being behind the curve, with a sustainable source of funding that would not be dependent on, well, we're interested in H1N1, so we're going to create surveillance for that disease, and here's money to do it, and 2 years later it's not so important, so there's no more funding. That's the kind of arena where a stronger WHO could carry the flag if they had more resources and then align them with a more tight, appropriate mission of what they will and will not take on.
That's kind of the end of it. We've gone a little over. I know you have somewhere to be at 5:30. Were there any last words or anything we might have missed that you wanted to add?
No, but well, maybe the only thing, I shouldn't say no because I do. So I gather that you're at Seton Hall.
Yes.
And some of your audience is student body.
Yes, it is.
And what I wanted to say is that's the group that I think really needs to understand these sorts of issues, to get engaged, maybe becoming health professionals or global health people in the future, but understanding the importance of health to development, to security, to world peace, to trade, and with their enthusiasm and intellect and energy to help make the kind of changes that are necessary, because we need to drive it, we need to push it. And I look at our student generation as the group that has the intellect, has the idealism, has the passion to do it. They just need to see where to direct all of that capacity that they have. And I think it's terrific that you're targeting this kind of a commentary for your student body.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. Those are very inspiring words. And yes, I am with the School of Diplomacy here at Seton Hall, and we do have a global health specialization. So I know it's something that many of our students are passionate about. Well, and thank you for your service, giving back to the new students and the younger generation. You're certainly an inspiring figure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's broadcast of The Global Current. Be sure to check us out on blogs.shu facebook.com/globalcurrent, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Have a great week.